Hi, everybody. Welcome to the second hour of the Santita Jackson Show on AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. It's a joy to be with you today. I want you to meet my morning stars on the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. Please click like and subscribe and hit that bell so that you can be notified whenever we come on. And do me a favor. Please do us all a favor. Continue to share the show. We're getting so much traction that I've received. Uh, I was contacted by Facebook, which is what they do when you start getting a lot of traction. And they've asked me to ask you to come over to migrate from the Santita Jackson and Friends Facebook page over to the Santita Jackson Show YouTube channel. So would you please do that? But you can also become my friend over on the Santita Jackson and Friends page, not the Santita Jackson page, the Santita Jackson and Friends page. You have a limit on a personal page. And I didn't know anything about that at the time. And so they kick people off. And that is not my fault. I want to keep all of my friends in just close to me. So please join the Santita Jackson and Friends page, but come on and meet the Santita Jackson Morning Stars on uh, on my YouTube channel. And of course, stay tuned to AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Some of the best progressive talk in the country is right here, 24/7, 365. Let's talk about presidential immunity. Should a president have immunity? Should they not be charged criminally? We're going to dig down into the weeds on this case. What is going on? I was watching the arguments, uh, the initial arguments, and they have been fascinating. And it seems that we're doing a reset on the republic. At the founding of this republic, the oligarchs and the monarchs had a fight. Now, monarchy is kind of waning, but now you have a new set of monarchs they call oligarchs. But it's still the people versus the haves and the have-nots. The people who have nothing, but the people who have most. So what is going on and who we are as a people? So much is at stake here. Many people are saying that, look, as we were thinking through the presidency and its limitations and where it has expansions, we were fighting monarchy at the time, more than 200 years ago. Now that's not the fight, but in some ways it is. How powerful should a president be? What limitations should a president have? Have our presidents really had any limitations? This is the most powerful office in the world, and they've been able to do a lot of things. It's just in America we make it pretty. So let's talk about that today. I urge you to listen to the questioning from the justices if you can, because when you do, you might even be surprised, a little surprised by what you hear from them. Um, I think that Ketanji Brown Jackson asked some really important questions, but so did Justice Sotomayor. So did Justice Amy Coney Barrett. I mean, it was just, so did Gorsuch, Justice Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. I mean, it really has been a quite robust form of questioning. And we're actually hearing these days, we're hearing from Justice Clarence Thomas. So where do you fall in on this? And according to the Guardian, who they have been keeping just really live coverage, there's a special counsel attorney who warned, Jack Smith's attorney warns of a sea change should the Supreme Court dramatically expand presidential immunity. What do you think is going to happen? According to the Guardian, just before oral arguments at the Supreme Court finished, liberal justice, as they characterized her in the Guardian newspaper, Ketanji Brown Jackson asked Michael Dreeben, who was arguing on behalf of special counsel Jack Smith, about the implications of the court dramatically expanding presidential immunity. She cited an amicus brief received by the court that warned of the consequences of a president who believes they would never face criminal liability for actions taken while in office. She said, and I quote, "I see that as a concern that is at least equal to the president being so worried about criminal prosecution that he, is a little bit limited in his ability to function." What about this sea change? And what about a president having immunity. There are legal implications, but there are political and social implications. And I know you have a short time to be with us, Dr. Gibbs. We're catching you in the midst of this academic season, and so you got to get right to it.
No,
But
excellent.
what do you make of the question that is being asked? I mean, well, of course, we're looking at President Trump, but I think it's really about more than President Trump. Yes?
But the idea of presidential immunity is obviously, very disturbing. The idea that the president would be immune from legal accountability is, of course, the whole idea of a lawless state, really. And that's people are rightly afraid of that. And, I think more generally that people are rightly afraid of the possibility that Trump, if reelected, would start reshaping federal institutions in a way to, prevent him from being challenged, reshaping the courts, reshaping everything. And that is a real concern, including the concern that perhaps he'll try and avoid efforts to remove him from office even after his term ends. Those are real issues to be dealt with. But the idea of presidential immunity under those conditions is especially disturbing. And I think I can't imagine the Supreme Court would give him anything like what he's looking for, even the current court. Although, I'm not saying that authoritatively. That's just a guess. There are some larger issues here. One of them is presidents typically have a remarkable degree of immunity to do what they want. I'm particularly concerned about foreign policy. The use of the CIA to overthrow governments, to spy on Americans, to assassinate foreign leaders, to perform extraordinarily unethical medical experiments on unsuspecting individuals, all of which has been done again and again by multiple presidents. This has never been prosecuted. Not only has the president not been prosecuted for authorizing things like this, but a CIA, at the best of my knowledge, no CIA officer, for example, has been prosecuted for illegal activity, including within the United States. And so there's an extraordinary immunity. Nixon was, in my view, rightly removed from office, almost impeached and removed, not quite, driven out of office for illegal actions involving abuse of power and obstruction of justice. He was not, however, ever indicted for conducting a secret undeclared war against Cambodia. He was not ever indicted for criminal events in Vietnam, spying basically, and often using violence against dissidents in the United States. He was not prosecuted for that. So there's an arbitrariness to presidential prosecution that's disturbing. And one wonders basically, what is it that causes people to address certain types of crimes but not others? This is an inconsistency, a double standard in American politics, you might say. So certainly, if in the unlikely event that the courts were to give Trump immunity from the charges he's facing, it wouldn't be that much of a leap from what presidents already have, which is a broad range of immunity on a broad range of issues, to do things really far more serious than anything Trump has so far been accused of doing. So we do have a double standard in politics. In presidential politics in particular, going back decades, that has been essentially legally sanctioned to the extent that it's never been legally challenged. On the other hand, I think any reasonable person would say that giving Trump immunity would be another leap in the wrong direction. Hopefully the Supreme Court is not going to give that to him.
But okay, we're all hazarding guesses, if you will. What do you think? What is the thinking? You really listed an extraordinary array of powers that a president already has. And we already know, or maybe many Americans. Do you think Americans know how powerful a president is? That they can authorize assassinations, and in fact, that's what they do. And the power that they have over our lives, let alone other people's lives. Do you think that Americans are aware of just how powerful the president is?
I think people tend to underestimate it, particularly a lot of the dirty things done in foreign policy, or some of the things, I should add, done domestically against dissidents in the United States by presidents and by agencies under the president, like the FBI. I think there's people less
today.
Well, again, there's a big pall of secrecy that hangs over the kinds of activities I'm describing. So we don't really know a lot of what the president is doing, including Joseph Biden is doing today. There's a big layer of non-democratic activity. One might say that there's a big spot of almost authoritarianism in American society in terms of almost a lawless presidency with regard to a whole range of issues that are simply not checked by the courts, not evaluated by the courts. And, so to a large degree, we've already crossed that Rubicon of giving the president a kind of authority to engage in lawlessness. I mean, one example is in the Constitution, it says, treaties are the law of the land. But the president has authority to violate treaties and regularly violates treaties. I can give examples if you'd like.
Please.
Well, the Non-Proliferation Treaty of 1968, people often forget this. It requires a number of things, including existing nuclear powers led by the United States, are required to act in good faith, to get rid of nuclear weapons at the earliest possible opportunity. The United States has regularly blocked opportunities that were presented to do this, totally in violation of the treaty, in violation of the U.S. Constitution, which elevates treaties to the law of the land. The courts have never intervened in that. So I mean, this is something that presidents are entitled to do. Courts do essentially are very deferential to the president on anything involving foreign policy or quote unquote national security, and tend to basically give the president free rein in those areas, including free rein not to even let the public know about what he's doing. It's what Trump is asking for is perhaps less outrageous than it might seem at the outset. To the extent, to a significant degree, we've already given the president, multiple presidents, immunity across a broad range of issues. Although, again, in no way am I endorsing the idea of giving Trump immunity in this case, which would be another, as I said, a step in the wrong direction. I'm just saying that this is something we've already done to a significant degree.
What is he asking for then?
I'm not a lawyer, and so I think that Daryl Jones would be much better qualified to give a technical blow-by-blow detail in terms of the specifics. But I'm assuming what he wants basically is immunity against any federal charges or state charges, I should add, in the case of Georgia, pertaining to anything he did as president. And I'm assuming the most serious of these charges are the ones in Georgia of election interference, which in my view are very serious charges, fully deserving of prosecution. And he wants to have immunity against those charges, that as president, he's entitled to essentially get away with it without prosecution. But again, I'll let Daryl Jones discuss that in more detail since he's specialized in this area and I'm not.
Daryl Jones, what is he asking for?
And Professor Gibbs is right on point that what former President Trump is asking for is immunity for anything that occurred while he was serving as president of the United States. That in essence, anything that he has done that he could not be prosecuted for, anything that he has done, he would not be able to be prosecuted for. And that one of the questions I think that I heard Professor Gibbs raise was, would it apply to the Georgia case, since this is a federal case that we're looking at, and that the question has been given rise to? The answer is yes, because what would happen is that if the if the U.S. Supreme Court decides that the President of the United States has immunity, then that applies not only to all the federal cases but to the state cases as well. That would not stop at the at the state level of cases. So it would apply to the Georgia case, it would apply to the New York cases. All those state cases would be affected if the Supreme Court decided that the President of the United States has absolute immunity from being prosecuted for anything he did while he was serving in office as President of the United States. So that ultimately is what he is seeking and what his request is.
I have class in an hour, so I'm going to have to sign off. But nice being with everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Take care, Professor.
Thank you so much. Attorney Todd Urey, what is the president, what is he looking to do? As you heard, Dr. Gibbs, they have enormous power to do a whole lot of things already. I mean, I think many of us are making this about Trump, while we're arguing about Trump, but I think this goes beyond president. Trump.
Mhm.
I mean, I think this could do not a reset on the presidency. Maybe it'll make us really clear on what presidents can do, what they do and have done. What are we looking at here?
Well, you're looking at the efforts of trying to get us as close to being a monarchy without being a monarchy.
Mm.
So the divine right of kings, that is our inheritance from Europe, Great Britain, particularly England, um, is one of the issues that led to the founders and the framers establishing a republic, because the king could do no wrong. The king was sovereign. That's where the notion of sovereignty comes from. And so the king, being the embodiment of divinity, right? God in human form, could do no wrong. The land belonged to the king, the legal system belonged to the king, even religion, the expression of seeking God, belonged to the king, to the monarch. Because we deviated from that, we pushed back against it because you had no rights unless the king gave you permission to have rights. The Constitution becomes that framework by which the citizens have rights and their elected leaders have duties and obligations. So now what the former president is trying to carve out is he is now seeking his second term, not his last term, is to try to create a mechanism and a framework by which he will have the reinforcement of legal interpretation by the Supreme Court that basically would leave the acts of the president, since we're talking about the office of president, but since he is seeking the office, he is really looking after his self-interest. He is not looking to strengthen the presidency. He is looking to make sure that he gets a pass to know what are going to be the guardrails, what are going to be the limits that will check his ability to take certain action should he return to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So if he gets back in, and depending on what the limits are to the immunity that he would be granted as president, it will then allow him to know what other unchecked powers he may have to use to remain president. This has always been an issue where the undertones of what we have heard, even from the first term, and even from what we saw, the issue with January 6th, was there was no intent to leave the presidency and to really kind of have a similar kind of posture as his peer, the current prime minister of Israel, in the reshaping of the courts there, to really say there's no check on what the person in power can do. And so what he is actually looking to see is, what will the Supreme Court say he can do under immunity? And most government officers, most government officials, even government employees have what the Supreme Court has created as a qualified immunity. Qualified immunity says you're immune from your official acts that are performed in the course of your duties or acts done while you are in that role, provided that they do not violate clearly established constitutional rights. It's an argument that we have every single day whenever we are suing, let's say, police officers for issues like excessive use of force under 42 USC 1983. That's the statute. And so many times police officers will initially say, if I've used excessive force, then I am immune to prosecution because that force was only used in the course of me performing my duties, and no one has established that there was a violation of clearly established constitutional rights. So that's kind of the quick, condensed version of what an entire couple of semesters of constitutional law and law school would try to cover. But here's what he's doing practically. He's getting what he needs. The outcome is really procedural. He already knows what his play is going to be, regardless of what the Supreme Court says, because this is not a question about the unchecked, unlimited pardon power of the president, although it did come up in some questioning as to the immunity conversation in the hearing, the oral argument today. But what it basically gives him is if the court comes back, and let's say this is among the last rulings that will come up in this session before the court adjourns in June. And let's say the court says, yes, there are some immunities available to the president, but they are not unlimited. And so therefore, we're remanding it back to the district court to work through what are those issues based on what the Supreme Court is going to lay out as the parameters of their ruling. Well, that basically pushes the reset because you may have to have some preliminary rulings. And one of the things that came up in oral argument is whether or not that would lead to the granting of leave to file what is called an interlocutory appeal, that you could basically ask the court to opine on whether or not certain constitutional rules apply before you actually litigate the thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it would basically hold up any prosecution until after the election. And if he gets to that point and he becomes presumptively the president-elect, it is highly unlikely that you're going to be able to prosecute the duly elected next president and have that prosecution hold, particularly on the federal charges. And if the court, let's say lightning strikes and the court says, though we don't think it's even plausible, that the president has absolute immunity, then if he gets back, then he can get rid of any of the state charges as well, which is why I think in Arizona, you have seen everybody except the former president, who's named as an unindicted co-conspirator, named in basically what is version 2.0 of the Georgia prosecution.
As I was listening to the oral arguments today, I thought they were fascinating because I really did feel that we're having a rethink about the republic, which we can and cannot do. And I cannot ignore, as I pivot to Dwight, our history. I mean, what presidents actually can and what they do. Should that be part of the conversation before I go to you, Dwight? Attorney Yuri? I mean, because even as Dr. Gibbs listed out what presidents actually have the power to do, what they have been doing, that's why then President Trump said, I think it was candidate Trump said, we already kill people. That's what we do. I mean, it sounded harsh and people, of course you heard everyone on television opining, oh my gosh, it's so terrible. That's not true. I said, no, it is true. That is what we do. Should we do it? No, but what is he looking for? Is he looking to expand his power, to expand the powers of the president going forward? Or is he looking to be absolved of anything that he might have already done?
Yes.
Both.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. He's trying to get a ruling before his issue becomes an issue, right? Remember, the federal prosecutions are all basically on hold. The state prosecutions are moving slow, except for the one in New York. He's really trying to get some decision that will erase that, but also leave a roadmap for him as to whether or not he's going to have checks on the power of the presidency, should he be the first one to try to test those limits as the incumbent by the time that ruling comes down, right? The current president, if this comes down in June, there's only a few months left. So the real first presidency is the next one that would fall under whatever holding comes down from the Supreme Court in this matter. But also remember that the question about the limits of immunity are tied to a certain set of facts in the current prosecution of the former president. And so even the court's analysis, if you listen to them, there was always a reference, particularly from the government lawyers, to the indictment, to the facts that are alleged in the indictment to inform why this court needs to put certain limits on its analysis or consideration of expanding the application of immunity, because you have a set of facts of what a president did while president that is raising the issue at all. If we did not have the facts of January the 6th, you don't have any question about can, under the commander-in-chief powers, unchecked in the Constitution, that other than Congress having the authority to declare war, the reason we've not had a formal declaration of war is because we've expanded the presidential powers, the police powers of the presidency, to take certain actions without necessarily having to get Congress's approval. You have to advise them, but you don't have to clear it with them. And so presidents have already extended what presidential powers could be and would be. It's just that they've not been applied in this sense, where the very integrity and stability of the republic was put at risk. And that's what's really at play here, based on what I heard. And I'm looking forward to hearing it again. I will just say, with Daryl Jones on here, I felt like it's a great time to be a lawyer, but it could also be a scary time to be a lawyer at the same time, depending on what this court decides to do.
Well, I can tell you, as a layperson, listening to the justices' questions was fascinating, because it's like they were taking us back to the founding of the republic and where we were then and where we are now 230 odd years later. Okay, now this is who we were then. We were dealing with kings and queens. Now we are dealing with oligarchs, not monarchs, but you still have people and they control what we do. I mean, now you have the Federal Reserve that just gave us a digital dollar, which is going to be, that's a discussion we need to have, because they're killing cash, which is where marginalized people like our people live, which is where poor white folks live. And if I have to depend upon the internet to spend my money and some AI, we got a problem. But I mean, Dwight and Nikki, talk to me. What are the political ramifications of what we're discussing right now?
Well, I don't think that the courts was looking at Donald Trump and what he's on trial for. I think they was looking past Donald Trump, and I think that they recognize that you can't be an empire unless you have imperial power.
Mhm.
And as they look at what the decisions that past presidents have made and may have to make, they understand that much of what they do is going to be illegal by moral and conventional standards. Assassination is, by moral standards, illegal, but it comes with the job description when you're the president. Bombing a city, two cities, killing 100,000 people can be considered morally illegal, but yet the president, under the guise of I was saving other lives, can do that, arresting citizens and putting them in jail because they look like your enemy is illegal and morally reprehensible. But the president has already done that. And so the question is that how much liability in hindsight will a president have for doing things which he is convinced is the right thing to do for the country? I heard them ask a very interesting question: will Obama be liable for the drones and the people he killed, and even those with unintended consequences?
Mhm.
And will he be at some point liable to get sued by those family members of people he bombed who never had a trial, never was found guilty? They were just a byproduct of him killing Gaddafi or whoever he decided to kill. And so they're looking at, in my opinion, the bigger picture is to how can you, in a time of powers of major powers competing for world domination, how can a president not have the right to make a quick draw decisions and not feel like that he's going to be liable for them, whatever they may be? I think at some levels, it's a mute question because in many ways, the president already has immunity. One is he has the right to certify all the evidence against him. He just classify it, and so you can't look into the evidence that of the violations that he had. At another level, he can always pardon himself. I think that their fear is that if they allow him to not have immunity, their fear is that what they already see is that every jurisdiction who has a problem with the president will use that as a pretext to put him on trial or try to put him in jail. And to that extent, they're right. And the fear is then this becomes a banana republic, because that's how the rest of the world operates. It's whenever they have a problem with the outgoing president, the incoming president, press charges, lock him up, and call it a day. And I think that's their fear, that this can degenerate into that.
Where do you think we're going with that? Or do you think this will be punted back to the states?
I think it'll be punted back to the states just to buy time. And I think that when the states try to immunity the different statutes that would have immunity, each one of those will be appealed to go back to the Supreme Court ad infinitum until the Supreme Court finally makes a decision, a symbolic decision, that the president is not above the law, but it has to be dealt with issue by issue. And so what does that mean? It just simply means that you take the high road and you keep the myth going that, that nobody's above the law. But the reality is the president is above the law because he really is a law unto himself. As the head of the executive office, his job is not just to interpret, his job is to enforce the law. But when the legislators do not give him those laws, then he unto himself decide what those laws should be, and he becomes a law unto himself. That's the reality of having an imperial government.
Do we want to deal with the reality, though, Dwight? And I'm going to open this question up to the rest of the panel, because you keep hearing people, the average American, say, look, no one's above the law. I'm like, yeah, the president is actually above the law. Some people are above the law. That's the reality. It is. Do you, or am I wrong here?
Well, he's not above the law. He is the law.
Okay, what is that? What's the difference?
Well, above the law means that you are governed by the law and submissive
Mm-hmm.
to the laws. But when you are the law, whatever you decide, and this is Trump's argument, becomes the law. This was Nixon's argument. If the president does it, then it's right.
Oh, okay.
By definition, because he is the executive, he's the executor of the law. And so, as he decides what the law is, it becomes the law. And who can reprimand him? He's the head of the military. So whatever he tells the military to do is the law of the land. He's the head of the judicial part of, so whoever he appoints, whatever he decides becomes the law of the land. That was Nixon's argument, and it's a legitimate argument. The way this country functions.
Well, I mean, Attorney Darrell Jones, what do you think?
Well, I think that when I listen to the arguments and I do the analysis, I mean, Dwight is correct that the president is our chief law enforcement entity, right, in the country. That, you know, he is the executive branch of government, right? The judicial branch interprets, the legislative branch, you know, creates the laws. It's the executive branch that has the U.S. Attorney General under. It's the executive branch of government that is charged with enforcing the laws. When we come to this immunity argument, however, you know, I agree that there have to be some actions of the president that are immune, you know, because he or she should feel comfortable making decisions and not thinking that they are going to be held criminally responsible when they leave office for the official decisions that they're making with regards to, you know, domestic or other decisions that are made. But I think that from the Supreme Court, I'm going to watch the dance they do with the phraseology of official duties, because I think that's what the focus of this is going to be. You know, is going to be determining what is the official duty. If it's an official duty, then yeah, that's probably the level of immunity that's there. If it's not, if it's beyond that, beyond the scope of the official duties, then there would not be the immunity that's there. What's going to be interesting here, and I think it was Gorsuch, I think, that raised it and asking the question. He's the one who came closest, I think, to describing what happens when there's a close election and the party loses and they decide that they don't want to leave office. You know, should there be immunity in that type of situation? Is that an official duty of the president? And I think that's, you know, going to be the analysis that they're going to be playing with when they finally reach this decision. Yeah, I think it's really also unfortunate that the Supreme Court has slow-walked this case for so long. Because this is the case that they should have taken up initially so that they could have the determination made. They should be able to hear the arguments, come up with their decision, so we wouldn't have Arizona wondering, can I charge the president? Can I charge the president? You know, that's a decision that should have already been done. But you know, I lean in that category to say, you know, that he has those three that he appointed, and they brought along a couple of others that just slow walked this thing and put us in this position. But ultimately, you know, I look for the court, I think, to do the right thing and say that he's not immune from these actions that he's taken with regards to the cases being prosecuted against him. I'm nervous with regards to some of the Florida stuff, but I'm less nervous with regards to how they phrase it. And it's going to be the whole official duties analysis, I think, it's going to come down to.
Do you think they're going to punt, or do you think they'll make a decision?
You know, this court is so odd. I could easily see them punting, and I don't know what other forces may be in place with regards to them making this decision. I don't think Clarence Thomas should be involved in it at all, right? So,
But
you know,
with these new ethic standards that Justice Roberts said we're putting in place, he's at the center. He is like the father of the court now. They're saying that this is the Thomas court.
exactly.
And yet he's still here.
And I understand all the connections through his wife, through all of that, Jenny Thomas and everything. There's just
No, explain that to the audience, because I don't want people to miss the details.
Well, you know, with Jenny Thomas, which is Clarence Thomas's wife, she was one of the people that was, you know, calling in and active with Meadows and everyone else during the whole January 6th insurrection. She was getting information. She was actually, you know, sleeping, of course, with Clarence Thomas, sharing with them what was happening is the allegation, what was happening there, trying to be certain that nothing happened to President Trump at that point in time. So, you know, she certainly was very active in the January 6th.
She was at the rally.
She was at the rally, right?
Capitol, but she was at the rally.
She was extremely active in it. And so, you know, his hands become so dirty and it looks so cloudy. And the water just looks so muddy with regards to what's happening with regards to now making the determination if the former President Trump has the ability to say that I'm immune, you know, that you can't do anything to me, that I should, you know, all the cases, all the criminal cases brought against me should fail because I was a president and the president is immune based on any actions he's done so long as he's carrying that active title. So, when I look at that, and I look at a Supreme Court now that has the lowest approval level of any branch of government at any time in our history, I can't say for certain that they can do what I think should be the right thing to do, and that is to say that he's not immune from his criminal responsibility. But I just can't say that with 100% certainty based on this court. I can't say it with 75% certainty based on this court.
Reverend Dr. Yuri?
Here's what I'm reasonably certain of.
Okay.
That whatever holding comes from the court, it will be a unanimous holding. A divided court on this question is extremely problematic because what typically happens from the court is the majority is going to write the opinion and then you'll get the dissent. The dissent often points to ways to kind of try to figure out how do you work around and bring a fresh issue back to the court that expands what they're looking at.
So are those generally bases for appeal? Dissents?
Well, those are bases to see this is the law as we interpret it now, but we're only looking at very narrow issues based on the claim that has gotten to us. But other claims that speak to these things, if those get to us, then we'll be able to take another look. And that's why I think the court is being very careful not to be so broad in how they are hearing this question so that they can get unanimity on what the major holding is going to be. Does the president have absolute, or what they would say called total immunity? That's going to be a unanimous no. Now, as to what the limits are, they will then interpret the rest of the question for what is before them, right? What they say is in the four corners of the actual petition. That's where they might get a little nuanced and distinct in terms of how they set the rule. But the general holding of law is going to be unanimous. The other part is this is where I would push back on Dwight in terms of this is a battle between the branches. It is not the president who decides what the law is. The Supreme Court says what the law is. So if the legislature passes the law, the president ratifies it, or if the president doesn't ratify it, it can be overridden, it can be rejected, but the Supreme Court decides whatever the other two do, they have the final say on whether or not it is legit. We saw it many times when there were challenges against President Obama's tenure, that you would see many challenges going up before the Supreme Court to try to put a check on his executive actions during the period that he was in office. A lot of times it would have to do, particularly at that point, what was going on with the Affordable Care Act. Remember that was the huge decision that John Roberts wrote, and that the reason the penalty held to make sure that it was actually legit is that when the president worked with the Congress to write the language, John Roberts interpreted the penalty as a way of raising funds, and raising funds, taxing, is one of the authorities of the Congress, so that when the law was written with the penalty is not a penalty. The penalty is a form of a tax, and therefore the ACA was constitutional.
Well, hold on, because even the way that was written, it was written, at least as a layperson, in a circuitous way. You had to get almost to the end to find out what the decision was.
Yeah, I mean, they're not going to give you the climax of the movie in the first few pages.
But
they'll give you a summary.
Like the first few pages that he was going to say no to ACA, and then at the end he says yes.
Well, I mean that's what you do if you're going to write a good suspense novel, right? Okay. You keep folks involved until you finally give them the answer, and if there's a cliffhanger that causes them to hold on, and we may have some of that in this case too. But let's be clear on what's happening in this conversation. It's not just does the Supreme Court give a president certain power. The Supreme Court is not going to give any president so much power as to make the Supreme Court's power to determine what the law is irrelevant. That ain't happening. So
Well,
now what you go ahead, Dwight.
let me respond to that real quickly. Whoever controls the military is the law. Is that Supreme Court told Andrew Jackson that the Indian removal was illegal. He could not do it. And
Yep.
he said, well, that's y'all's opinion. But since I control the military, I'm going to set up the Trail of Tears. So Lincoln suspended habeas corpus, and which is illegal, but he was in charge. The Emancipation Proclamation was really an illegal act because he made a proclamation over a country that he didn't control. It's whoever controls the military, because all they have to do is declare martial law. And once they declare martial law, whatever they do becomes legal by definition.
So here's the thing that I would say to that. We have to define what controlling the military means. That the ability to give the order is one thing. But quite honestly, who controls the military is the one who controls the purse. And let's go back to history, since you raised history. We almost lost the Revolutionary War because Washington could not take care of the troops. We almost ended up going down because there was so much dissent because they could not raise the money. That's where the federal taxation framework was actually kind of thought of, because the states who actually had their own contribution, right? It's like raising the offering at church. And we tell everybody ought to pay tithe, but there's no one that's going to be there to check and make sure that you've got it. And so if one state doesn't meet its obligation and another state does, and you still have an issue with the military, you have to change the framework. So I would say, going back to my point, is that it is a battle around the branches of government. The Congress, particularly the House of Representatives, controls spending and taxing. Everything that has to do with money starts in the House. Those 435 members of the House are directly elected by the people. And let's remember that the first elections of the presidency, if you were to have some issues, it goes back to the members of the House in the states. So I'm not saying that the president doesn't have any power. What I'm saying is, according to the validity of the Constitution and how it is written and applies, the Supreme Court is going to protect the interests of the three distinct branches of government, and they're not going to give a president, any president, Trump or any other. And there will be examples where they will try to push. But remember, the Trail of Tears wasn't just a presidential idea. That was part of the policy of the government. It was consistent with the notion of manifest destiny and westward expansion. So it wasn't that we have this kind of inconsistency between the presidency and what's going on in the representative branch. The Supreme Court is still going to protect its interests in this holding, especially to determine that it will still be the arbiter, the umpire of what powers the other two branches hold. Otherwise, if they are able to erode the principle of having your issues brought before a tribunal, that's the definition of martial law, not declaring martial law itself.
I have
But
about 3 minutes.
okay, real quickly, if I can respond. But what happens in an imperial country is when you look at countries like Russia and China, that Putin threatens the legislator to pass his laws by threatening to arrest them if they don't pass the law. And that's why I say whoever controls the military controls the law and the government.
But
And
remember,
so
the members of
symbolically,
Congress are immune from arrest. That's the law. You would have to break the law to arrest a federal legislator during the period that the legislature is in session. That is actually an express prohibition. So if something that extreme were to happen, you don't have to have a declaration. It's already clear that you have insurrection taking place within the government, at which point the authority over the military then fails. That was what the former chair of the Joint Chiefs was wrestling with, to make sure that the president never got so far away that getting to the point of giving an illegal order would force the Joint Chiefs to have to abide by it. It's a circular game, but there is no, and I think we'll bear this out once the ruling comes down. And I'm happy to hear what Daryl's thoughts are. Is this Supreme Court is not going to set itself up to leave any room for there to be such a, and I think the word was Santita used a circular, so such a circular outcome to have everything in terms of the integrity of the republic to hinge on who happens to win an election.
Daryl, 1 minute.
You know, I think that Reverend Gary is right on point with that. You know, it's going to be interesting. You know, one of the points that Todd raised that I want to see what happens.
I need you to come a little closer to the microphone, Daryl.
One of the things that's going to be really interesting to see what happens in this situation is if, in fact, the Supreme Court, I agree that there will be I think it'll be a unanimous decision with regard to the total immunity, that the president didn't have total immunity. But the question then will become, I suspect, how they nuance everything else with regards to talking about, you know, if there's an official act and all of this official act duties of the presidency. That's what I think this is really going to hinge on. And that's going to be the part of the opinion where you're going to see the dissents. And I guess they're going to carve out something, some type of way to determine when there is an official duty and when there isn't. It's going to be really interesting to watch the Supreme Court work this through.
Well, I mean, they sound like there's unanimity, and if you listen to the way the questioning, I was surprised at the synchronicity, if you will. Dwight, do you have anything to say in the last minute?
I defer to the lawyers.
Okay. Well, you know,
Don't do that.
Well, no. I brought you all on so we could have balance, because the fact is, this is legal and it's also social. It's cultural. I mean, there are many, many questions that we're asking and that we're having to answer. I hope that Americans are prepared for it, because really we have to decide whether we're going to have an imperial presidency. I think we have to decide whether we're going to be an empire. Gore Vidal said his principal disappointment in America was that we chose empire when we could have achieved civilization. Civilization is an achievement, everybody. We're not on track for that. If we were on track for civilization, you would not have a hungry mouth in this country. You'd have a floor beneath which no human being could fall. That's civilization. A president would not feel that they have the right to kill anyone. That's civilization. The president would not be run by the corporations. The president would tell them how things roll, because that's what we hired him and eventually her to do. So we'll see where this goes. But boy, oh boy, these are exciting times in which we live. And I want you to stay vigilant, keep your eyes open, and let's just see where all of this goes. I'm Santita Jackson here on AM 950 Radio. May God bless you real good. Have a great, great, great day and a wonderful weekend. I'll see you on Keep Up Alive with Reverend Jesse Jackson on Sunday. God bless.